Chapter 8, Ancient Greece. Section 3, The Golden Age of Greece. We're going to start off today's lesson by talking about the arts and architecture. The Greeks invented drama. I'm sure some of you are familiar with drama. It's a written work designed for actors to perform. And wealthy citizens of Athens would sponsor the productions of dramas. And then you would have acting troupes, which are groups of people who do acting, that were assigned to specific productions. I need more drama! As it goes with Athens, only the men were able to perform in the plays. And so they wore colorful costumes and masks to portray characters. They would even play the female parts. So they would have specific costumes and masks to portray those characters. Dramas had two forms of tragedy. Two forms of drama. You have tragedy and you have comedy. Tragedies were serious dramas that presented the downfall of an important character, and I just want to cry about this because tragedies are awful. But this is a tragic mask right here. Ooh, sorry, it's a tragedy. Oh. And this is a famous tragedy writer. His name is Aeschylus. Oh, tragedy. Comedies were humorous works that made fun of politics, people, and ideas. That's a comedy mask right there. A very famous comedian is Aristophanes right there. He's funny looking. Greek artists wanted to capture the ideal in their work, which means they want to portray objects in as perfect form as possible. They wanted to create the sense of order, the sense of beauty, and a sense of harmony in art. Now I want you to take a look at this piece of art. No, this is not Greek art. This is a Mesopotamian statue. But I want you to look at the features here of this Mesopotamian statue, where you see the gigantic eyeballs and the bump that's a nose and this little slit for a mouth. And this beard is kind of square, but it has lines that represent, I guess, the waves and hair. You don't see much muscle tone in the arms. You see some lines that would represent fingers. You don't see any legs or anything like that. That's a Mesopotamian art picture. Now look at this picture. This is a Greek piece of art, and you can tell the huge difference between Mesopotamian art and this art. It's all about the ideal. Now, if you look at this artwork, you can see muscle tone. You can see muscles. You can see the chest muscles. You can see your rib cage. You can see the leg muscles, right there, calf muscles. You see fingers. You can see facial features, the fingers. You can see even a fingernail. This is showing the body in a perfect image. That's what the Greeks were striving for. One of the most famous statues created was of Athena, and it was built by a guy named Phidias, and it was put inside the Parthenon. So you can see kind of a recreation of that statue right here of Athena. Architects worked to create beautiful buildings with graceful proportions. You can see this is the front of like a drawing of what the Parthenon looked like when it first was built. So we're going to go through the different parts of a building. So the first part is a column. So you can see here, these columns right here. These are what's holding up the structure, these columns, and it goes all the way around the building, all the way around. The second part is a colonnade. A colonnade is a series of columns. So you have this would be a colonnade, but then up here, right here, if you can see my little blue lines here, these are little columns up here that are part of something called the colonnade. They go around the building as well. And finally, you have the pediment. The pediment is this triangular structure right up here at the top that kind of that's between the colonnade and the roof. So the roof would be up here, of course. But this is the pediment. It kind of tells a story, in this case, of Athena. Now I want to go through a really quick lesson of what the columns. There's three types of columns that you would see in Greek architecture. You have this kind right here, which is called Doric. Then you have Ionic here. In Ionic, you can tell because of these little swirly things here. That's Ionic. The Doric, you have nothing at the top but a flat platform. And then you have this one called Corinthian. And you could tell with Corinthian because it looks like all these different like leaves and flowers blooming from it. Now the Parthenon, as we should know by now, was built for Athena and was decorated with scenes from Athena's life. That's where you see an impediment here. We're now going to move into some three other areas where the Greeks were well known for: democracy, history, and philosophy. Now, we've talked about the Greek democracy, which is a direct democracy, and it worked quite successfully. And other city-states noticed how well it did work, and so they adopted it. And even in modern times, other countries have adopted the idea of democracy, like the United States. So, democracy is built for people by people. It's all about the people, as we've talked about. When it comes to history, we have two guys here that are well known in the Greek history as historians. The first one is Herodotus. That is this guy right here. He was known as the father of history and recorded stories about important events. This next guy over here, his name is Thucydides. He wrote a history of the Peloponnesian War while it was in progress by using documents and eyewitness accounts of what was going on. Philosophy was developed by the Greeks. Philosophy is a logical study of basic truths about knowledge, values, and the world. Greek thinkers used reasoning skills instead of myths and faith to explain what's going on in the world. And they did this by asking lots of questions. So when I say, what is philosophy? And you notice all the question marks, that's the whole point of philosophy, is to ask questions. Asking questions. So it's all about reasoning why things happen, not because it happens just because it does. Now we're going to talk about three philosophers, and these are like the big three of philosophy. And the first one is a guy named Socrates. Socrates encouraged people to examine their ideas by asking question after question. This type of question and answer style was called the Socratic method. Question, 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 get an answer, question and more, get an answer. The Socratic method. The whole idea of the Socratic method is sort of like a little kid. Let's say a 4-year-old. Where are we going? Why are we going? What are we doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing that way? How come? What are we doing? The next philosopher is a guy named Plato. He wrote dialogues. Dialogues are basically conversations between his mentor, Socrates, and other people. And this, again, explores the whole idea of philosophical questioning. He started a school called the Academy. The third philosopher is a guy named Aristotle. He opened up a school called the Lyceum, again, following the whole idea of the Socratic method. And he tutored a young Alexander the Great. We're going to talk about some other famous Greeks and some of their accomplishments. We'll start with Aristophanes. He established or estimated the distance around the world. So here is Aristophanes, and his kind of the idea of what he determined the distance around, meaning how long it would take to go completely around the world. Now you can't ask me that because I'm not really good at mathematics, but you kind of get an idea of what he was doing if he was based out of Alexandria and you're looking at the equator and measuring the degrees around the planet. Aristarchus proved the Earth revolves around the sun. There's old Aristarchus right there, and his idea that both the Earth and the Moon went around the sun. Ptolemy supported the idea that the Earth was at the center of the universe. Ptolemy's thinking was not out of the ordinary. I mean, there are lots of people who thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. So you kind of see this diagram here of what Ptolemy and others believed, where the Earth was the center, the moon revolved around Earth, and everything else revolved around the Earth, including the sun. Soon someone will disprove that, but that's what the common thinking was. Euclid formed geometry. When you get bigger and you get into high school, maybe you've already done some geometry in middle school, but geometry is a big class. That's thanks to this guy, Euclid. And here's a nice funny little cartoon about geometry. It says, geometry is all about relationships. I'm tall. Oh, so I'm short. Thanks a lot for making geometry, Euclid. I don't like geometry. Finally, we have a guy named Archimedes who developed the compound pulley and created a water lifting device. Here's a caricature of Archimedes with his little device. You can see from this little funny cartoon that he's cranking it and the water's pouring out into the bucket. Here's a diagram of how that would actually work. Here's the body of water. Here's the device. You crank it. The wheels kind of bring the water up, and then it pours out into the receptacle that you want it to go into. That is the end of section 3.